Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Just Law on IQRA TV. This is the third part to the show. Just before the break, we were looking at European nationals and how they sponsor their partners to come to the United Kingdom. And what I've said throughout the show many times is that it is much easier to do that than before because there's no need for the European national to show employment anymore in the United Kingdom. All the European national now needs to do is obtain pre-settled or settled status, and this is something that you can apply for under the EU settlement scheme, which I've looked at previously on this show. So once the European national has obtained pre-settled or settled status, then it is much easier for the partner abroad to apply, because what they are able to do is use the EU settlement scheme as well to apply to come to the United Kingdom. And when they make the application, when the partner who's abroad, whether they're in India, Pakistan, wherever it is, when they make the application under the new EU settlement scheme, as part of the application, when it comes to asking about the EU sponsor, the application will ask whether there is a reference number for the European national who's applied for pre-settled status or settled status, and you will be then, as the partner will then be required to input the reference number. Once that is done, that takes away the requirement to show employment, and that makes the application significantly easier than what used to be the case. Obviously, there are still other requirements which need to be met. So one is the EU national has to be a European citizen, which is obvious because they've got a case reference number for their pre-settled or settled status application. But there are obviously other requirements which need to be fulfilled, such as the partner who's applying would still have to demonstrate that they are legally married to the European national. So there would be a requirement to submit a valid marriage certificate, obviously. Then there can't be any issues surrounding that. So if there's been a previous marriage, that needs to have been validly brought to an end, and all the issues surrounding that obviously are still live issues. So in your most typical case that you come across, hopefully they don't have these complications, and it's just a question of showing that the EU national in the UK and the partner who's applying, they are married, and that's simply done by showing that there is a valid marriage certificate. Now, that's an easy hurdle to get over. You've demonstrated that the parties are married. Then the other requirement, which still is an important requirement, which still has to be met, full criteria still has to be fulfilled, which is that the relationship between the parties is genuine. So the Home Office will still want to look at and make sure that it's not some kind of sham marriage arrangement. And the way the Home Office looks at the relationship is very similar to how a normal immigration spouse application is considered. They look at what is the evidence of the marriage subsisting. So they will look at whether there are wedding photographs for the couple, whether there are photographs together following the marriage, and certainly if the marriage has subsisted for a considerable period of time, they'll want to see a selection of photographs over a period of time. Just on that point, where the marriage hasn't been conducted, let's say over the last 6 months, and the parties have been married for, let's say, a couple of years, the Home Office again will want to see that the parties have met over that period. So for example, where somebody's married 2 years ago, it's not sufficient to say, well, we married 2 years ago, we're now applying, we haven't met in the meantime because we've not had time, etc. The Home Office will look at that suspiciously. It'd be expected that in that 2-year period, at the very least, you must have met each other once. So when the Home Office is looking at these applications, although it's an easier application than before, because employment is no longer an issue. The focus now in reality moves to proving that this is all genuine. So your wedding photographs with a lot of family members together, your the photographs of the couple together after the wedding and every time that they've met, proof that the EU national sponsor has travelled to the partner's home country and you know, spent time with the partner. All that becomes more significant. Then obviously other evidence of the relationship subsisting, such as evidence of telephone contact between the parties, evidence of messages between the parties, whether it's by WhatsApp or some other app or Facebook or Messenger, whatever it is, but evidence of ongoing contact. And then lastly, what you tend to see is evidence that, although not mandatory, evidence that EU sponsor is supporting his or her partner abroad. So the typical sort of evidence that you tend to submit with a normal immigration spouse application showing that the marriage is genuine and subsisting, you must obviously still submit that when it comes to an EU partner coming to the United Kingdom. So on finances, it's no longer an issue. You're not looking at employment. You are also not looking at accommodation being available. You're simply looking at now whether EU national has pre-settled status or settled status. You're simply looking at whether the marriage is valid in law and whether the relationship is genuine or not. Now that's a much easier application to make than a normal spouse application under the usual immigration rules. Now, just a couple of points before we finish for the day. All these applications are now online, and the beauty about a European application is that there's no fee payable either. There's also no English language requirement either. So in that sense, it's a much easier application as well. But it's an online application which is made specifically as the partner of somebody who has status under the EU settled scheme, whether it's pre-settled status or settled status. And once the online application is made, the supporting evidence for that online application, the supporting evidence is scanned and it's uploaded onto the new platform that the Home Office has for dealing with these applications. So there's no longer a requirement for physical hard copies, original copies to be submitted. The Home Office is moving towards sort of a more digital approach where documents are, applications are made online, documents are scanned and uploaded. And for this EU settlement scheme, the position is the same. The application is made online. Beauty of it is, under this partner scheme, there's no employment requirement, no accommodation requirement, there's no fee, there's no English language requirement, there's no TB requirement. But what you are showing is that you are legally married to the European national and that the relationships is subsisting. So it is a much easier application to make than a normal immigration application. Fortunately, that brings us to the end of the show. Hopefully, inshallah, we'll be back next week on Monday at 6 o'clock. Until then, Assalamu alaikum.